all council members here tonight, and therefore a quorum. I'll call the meeting to order with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome all of our citizens who are here tonight to this meeting, and feel free to participate at appropriate times. I will now move on to in the communication items from council. Are there any items from council tonight? Hearing none, we'll move on to citizens' communication. You may step forward to speak to anything on the, that may or may not be on the agenda, but I do ask that if you're here to speak to a matter that's one of the public hearings, please reserve your comments to that public hearing. Is there any citizens' communication?
My name's Michael Vondro. I live at East North Mobile Home Park, and I would like to thank code enforcement for all the hard work they've been doing, trying to clean up the trailer park. For the last year, the manager was unwilling or unable to do his job, so they stepped in and did the job for him. Christian Watts, he's one of the ones that makes the weekly rounds to keep it clean. And he was one of the ones responsible for fixing the underground leak in the middle of the road. You know, when no one wanted to get involved, he found the leak and had like 6 code enforcement vehicles come. And I'd like to thank Grace Garcia. She's in charge of code enforcement. They've been working real hard to keep the park clean, and that's about it. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Any other citizens' communication? Seeing none, we'll move on into the items with public hearings.
Item C1 is the first public hearing on the City of Victoria budget for fiscal year 2019-2020 on August 27th, 2019, 5 p.m. at City Council Chambers here at 107 West 1 Linn Street.
In item 1, I would open a public hearing on this matter. Anyone here to speak to that matter, please step forward. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing.
Item C2 is the first public hearing on the 2019-2020 City of Victoria tax rate here on August 27th, 2019, 5 p.m. at City Council Chambers, 107 West 1 Linn Street.
Now open a public hearing on this matter. Anybody here to speak to that matter, please step forward. Seeing none, we'll move forward.
Mayor and council, remember, it's our practice to list separately the first reading of the budget, and when we do that, our local code requires that we have a public hearing, and so now we're going to have another public hearing on the budget. This is an ordinance approving and adopting a budget for operating the municipal government of the City of Victoria for fiscal year beginning October 1st, 2019, and ending on September 30th, 2020, appropriating money for the various funds and purposes of such budget, including appropriations of money to pay interest and principal seeking fund requirements on all indebtedness, repealing all conflicting ordinances and appropriations, providing for savings, and declaring an effective date.
So I'll open a public hearing on this matter. Anybody to speak to it, please step forward. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing.
Make a motion to approve item C2,
Second?
C3.
sorry, C3.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve item C3. Any discussion?
I just have a quick question. I haven't had a chance to really look at the whole budget, but I was looking at the, I guess it's like the synopsis that Gilbert gives us. On the public safety, you have an automobile vehicle locator software program. Is that for the police or is that for them to?
To identify the
Yeah,
vehicles.
I'll answer that.
Okay.
That's for a very specific, the police chief talked about it, and if you have specific
questions on that specific project, the chief can talk about it. But big picture, that's the software that will be utilized at the dispatch to be able to more easily route calls to the nearest unit, and then also do a better job of us just knowing where the units are.
Oh, okay.
So it's pretty straightforward software that'll help with that
Okay.
exercise, to be more efficient.
And then the other question was the implementing of the Evergreen Cemetery Mapping Program or project is, I'm just curious about cemeteries in general. Do we have, is that so that we know who's buried there, or what is?
So let me try and answer that
Okay.
too. So, and as you know, we operate and are responsible for maintaining a cemetery.
Right.
There's been some issues with some old, I guess, tombstones that no longer are there. There's conflicting reports on where there are deceased bodies versus not. And so this software attempts to just clarify that and help us identify where there are. Maybe there are some that aren't labeled, and we can go back and cross-reference with the records that we have. Staff is limited with how back they can go with some of these records, so there have been instances of people coming forward, saying that's where my relative is, that's where my relative is, but we don't have any record of it. And so there's some cross-referencing and confirming that needs to happen, and this will allow us to do that and help take the step in the right direction for that.
Is that information going to be available online to, for
The
future?
results of that?
Yes, future reference.
No, I'm not sure that's the intent.
Oh, okay.
Genealogy purposes?
Well, I mean, just.
Yeah, I'm not sure the intent, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I've had need to find a location, and I've called the Parks Department, and they're very responsive. I mean, they didn't have the answer at the tip of their fingers, but they were able to locate. So I don't know about putting it online.
Sure.
That's a whole different thing, but I mean, it is available to the public.
Okay, so you would just call the Parks Department? Okay.
And we've had that happen, even in the time that I've been here, we've had a situation that arose, and Parks worked closely with that resident to resolve the issue.
Oh, okay. I just was surprised. Okay, that's fine. Those are my only two questions.
Any further questions?
I'd like to bring up something that's not in the budget, and I don't want to necessarily include it in the budget, but it's something that we're missing. We're missing on grants. The county has a grant writer. They get millions of dollars of grants. We don't have a dedicated grant writer. There's software that will tell you all the grants that are available. We should have that software. We should have a dedicated grant writer. Beaumont just got a grant to improve sidewalks by schools. We didn't apply for that grant. I would hope that we can come up with some savings in our present budget and get that software and get a grant writer, because we're missing millions of dollars. And we owe it to the people of Victoria to be applying for grants. I don't want to change the budget. I like option 3. I like all the options. Option 3 is great.
Yeah, and just briefly, if I can add to that, we do apply for grants, so I don't want the public that might be listening in thinking that we don't apply for any grant. But it is a decentralized approach, so a lot of the departments are responsible for their own grant search, grant writing process. Of course, for some of the bigger grants, we hire people like GrantWorks to help us through that exercise. But on the day-to-day, I would agree that there probably are grant opportunities that we're missing. So I'll just leave it at that for now. But there are grants that we apply for. Parks has applied for grants. We've received some Texas Parks and Wildlife grants in the past. Of course, Darryl does a good job. He talked about a few meetings ago about receiving some small grants. So there is work that goes into applying for grants. But you're right in that we don't have a centralized grant administration division or department. And there are cities that have that.
Point well taken. Any other comments? Hearing none, I'll
No.
call for, excuse
Are
me.
we going to talk about?
The budget?
Yes.
No, yeah. Anything?
I'd like to bring up our healthcare premiums and get some more information in regards to the lowering of the premiums. How many people does this affect per per which health savings plan that they're in. and
Sure.
What's the effect on our employees?
Sure. So thank you for bringing that up earlier today, because it allowed us the opportunity to put a few PowerPoint slides together
You're welcome.
to answer that question. So thank you for that.
I don't want to catch anybody with their pants down.
No, it's okay. Well, you could be cited for that. So let's see if this works.
I recommend belts.
Let me change it here. I figured it'd be a little bit easier to do this. Okay, so if you recall, we're proposing reducing the employee contribution part, and this slide summarizes on the right-hand most column what those amounts would be on the reduction. The bubbles, if we can call them that, demonstrate how many employees are within those plans. Are you looking at it?
There we go. There we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
So for instance, from the we have 59 employees in Plan 1, 365 in Plan 2. And so you can see that with the reduction on the employees that are on Plan 1, the range of the increase in take-home pay will range from 1% to just south of 4%. And on the employees on Plan 2, it's a significantly smaller increase to take-home pay. But nonetheless, there's an average of 77% increase, or 0.77% increase in take-home pay. And you could see the percentage range right below that. I will note that we have 144 employees that waived coverage. So not every single employee will see an increase in take-home pay. They're in this setup. But the majority of them would be impacted in some way, shape, or form. Let me see what the next slide is. Oh, this worked earlier. There we go. So this just is a breakdown of the employees that will not see an increase in take-home pay. We have 28 fire personnel that waived coverage, 41 police personnel that waived coverage, 27 in public works. Those, of course, are our biggest departments. And then the 48 split out amongst the others. I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but I hope at least seeing the information might answer your question or maybe spur other questions.
Well, it does. I think when we had first discussed the health plans, I think that there was at least an idea that while there wasn't a raise, this was a raise.
Sure, the increase in take-home pay,
Sure,
right?
thank you.
Yeah.
But 0.77% is hard to call it that, at least.
Sure.
At least to me.
Sure, no, that's fair.
That's why I wanted the breakdown of who it affected, and then obviously there's 144 that would not, correct?
Correct,
Of course, they're not taking the insurance, so that,
right. Now, also keep in mind that if we take the approach of increase in take-home pay, in years where the city has done what the city here calls an across-the-board, well, when you do the across-the-board and you attach it to a year where you're also increasing employee premiums, then technically, there's also, those 144 are taking that take-home pay that the ones that are enrolled aren't, because they didn't get the increase in the premium. So it's hard in any scenario to do something that increases everybody's take-home pay. So I just want to throw that out there because, you know, it can go both ways. Now, obviously, yes, you could do an across-the-board and not change anything, and that would increase everybody's take-home pay. But that, of course, would cost us more money.
sure.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on any of that?
When's the last time that we've had stipends? When's the last time that we've had a across-the-board?
Oh, I forgot to mention earlier, sorry, that besides that, there are a few positions that are slated to get an increase in pay. We mentioned at the last meeting the increase to streets and utility maintenance workers that came with Proposal 3. So this slide shows the number of positions that are impacted by what we already have in the budget that council, for the most part, agreed on at the last meeting. The community center, we briefly talked during Cheryl's presentation at the beginning that we wanted to increase our minimum wage to at least $11. And so it was a very minimal impact to the budget, but that included 4 positions. This body has never really historically gotten a very specific departmental presentation from our building maintenance operation, so you haven't been exposed to this, but there was a slight increase to 4 positions in the building maintenance division that had also been vacant for a while that were already included in the budget. So these 3 things that I mentioned here, these 25 positions, they're already included in the proposed budget. So just wanted to throw that out there. Did you go to the beginning?
Right.
Sorry. There's a slide in here that answers your question on the across the board. If I can get to it. This works a little easier. Whoops. Okay, there we go. Whoops. Nope.
That's it.
There we go.
That's it right there.
Go back.
There you go.
We'll figure this out eventually. Anyway, this slide just shows the summary of what has transpired over the last 4-year period, 5 years going into fiscal year 20. So you could see that the last across the board, or at least what we call across the board, happened in 2019, actually, with that 3% across the board for all positions except certified police fire positions in step pay plan. And so you could see what was done in 2019. That also came with the $1,000 in health savings account. But recall that the year prior, in 2018, there were some changes to the increases in premium.
Yeah.
So 2019 was probably a year that was intended to maybe make some of that up.
Particularly from 2017 as well.
Yeah. And you could see that there was an across the board in 2016, not in 2015, of course, nothing in 2017. And so that kind of summarizes a little bit of what's transpired in the past. We did, for sake of exercise, you might just help me go through this, put together what it would cost us if we did a number of scenarios. And I'll run through those real quick because I think it's important that everybody, including staff, the public, council, is understanding of the budget implications. There was an article that came out about the county doing a $1 increase or a couple dollar increase for law enforcement. And I think there was conversation maybe about doing just a $1 increase for employees, which is a different approach than taking a traditional percentage approach. And so this slide that's in front of you right here is intended to represent what the budget impact would be if we did a $1 increase per hour for everybody that's not police and fire, and did a $2 per hour for police and fire. And you could see that that's $2 million total for the budget. If you do a percentage base, it's a much lower cost, and we'll see that in another slide. Can you go to the next slide, James? It's gone. This is if it was $1 for everybody. The previous slide had $1 for non-police and fire. This shows $1 for everybody, including police and fire, and you could see that that budget impact would be $1.5-ish million. So taking this dollar approach is significantly more costly than taking the traditional percentage approach. Pros and cons, obviously, taking the dollar approach, everybody gets the same amount, because obviously when you do a percentage approach, those making more money get more money than the ones making less. Go to the next slide, James, please. This is intended to represent if we did the 1% across the board. And so you could see how a 1% across the board is significantly less costly than doing a $1. So the 1% across the board would equate to $360-ish thousand, and a 2% across the board would equate to about $718,000.
Essentially 2 pennies. Roughly. What's a
In-
penny
of
worth?
tax rate?
Yeah, what's a penny worth?
About 350-ish?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
so
like-
Yeah.
essentially 2 pennies.
Yeah.
It's a difficult decision. We got to be stewards of the taxpayers' money, but our greatest assets here are our employees.
Agreed. And I could tell you that some of the conversations we've had internally is that we recognize that we could do a better job of paying our employees. We have several issues to worry about when we're talking about our lower-end employees. There could be compression issues, so it's not as simple as saying, increase minimum wage, because you really have to take a look at the big picture. We don't have the resources in-house to really truly come up with a plan on how to proceed with that. From experience, I could tell you that there are consultants that exist out there that can come in and do a compensation analysis for you to really provide you the details of, okay, if the direction was to want to push for $13 an hour minimum wage, as an example, which of course would be a $2 increase than what we are now, how much would that cost with taking into account the compression issues that would come from that? We don't have the resources in-house to be able to do that. So we've talked to staff about, maybe through the fiscal year, sort of pulling our different budgets together to maybe hire somebody to help us do that, so that when we are talking about compensation, it's coming from a much better place than simply across the boards. Because across the boards don't fix anything other than give people more money, right? They don't fix any disparity issues that might exist within the organization. They don't really take into account, well, how does that position pay compared to our comparative cities or comparative partners in the region? So across the boards are helpful in some ways, but in other ways, they don't truly address disparity issues or other issues that might exist, which is why sometimes bringing a consultant from the outside can be beneficial. Anyway,
I don't
just
have the
throwing that
answers.
out there.
Yeah, I don't have the answers either. I just think it's a conversation worth having and looking at, because it's going to be problematic if we don't address it.
Oh, agreed. Absolutely.
Well, and I can tell you, I agree with you as well. I brought up some of the same questions, and as I quickly learn, as we all do, once we're on this panel, things are always more difficult than they appear when you're sitting outside looking in. And I can appreciate the issues and complexities involved in it the more that I educate myself about it. But I think where I think you might be heading, and where I hope this council would be heading, that as we start into the new year, that we make it clear to the city manager that we want to explore ways of beginning to start compensating our employees better. Because I think that direction needs to come from us, and then hear what you can do to make that happen.
Certainly a priority.
And I think I would like to make it a priority, and especially with our first responders. And, but all of our employees, they're all our most valuable assets. So I think at this point in time, it's going to be difficult to deal with until we know more. But I would hope moving forward that we as a council will adopt that attitude and express it, that we really do want to start looking at the way we compensate our employees in a different light. So,
And if I may add, compensation also includes benefits, and I know that the health insurance topic is obviously one of priority as well. We mentioned briefly during Cheryl's presentation of HR, gosh, it seems like that was forever ago already, but we talked about how we would be undertaking an RFQ process to evaluate our benefits consultant. So we're going through that process now. That RFQ has closed. We've received the responses. We're currently in the evaluation phase of that. So we anticipate in November or December, I think it was, October maybe? I can't remember. October? Okay. So October timeframe, November latest, to come forward with you for a recommendation on selection for that. So the idea is that with this new consultant on board, we can start having conversations, thinking outside the box, exploring different avenues, employee health clinic, exploring all sorts of things that maybe we haven't explored in the past, to help bring, hopefully, at least a more robust solutions base to the health insurance topic. Because we realize that's a big part of it, along with compensation. We have to kind of prioritize both. So we're working towards that, and I've committed to staff that this is a big priority for me, even if it wasn't a priority for y'all, quite frankly. I'm ultimately responsible for all of the employees and ensuring that I fight for them to have the right tools and resources to succeed, and them having the appropriate compensation is part of that. So I'm glad that we're all on the same page.
any further comments?
Just when you present it, I'd like to see it in a T-comp fashion, total compensation.
Sure.
Because there's a big factor of TMRS on top of it.
Yeah, true, fair enough. Fair
to
enough.
what, you know, at the end of the day, what is the true, if you're just looking at it from a cash compensation, what is that per hour? If you
Yeah,
add everything
that's true.
up.
Well, you could see here how much TMRS is percentage-wise.
I know.
So it's significant what the city puts in for just the pension of the employee.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay.
There are no items on the consent agenda tonight. That takes us to section E, which is first E1, a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a lease agreement with Enterprise Fleet Management to lease 12 fleet vehicles during fiscal year 2019-2020 in the amount of $67,845 and declaring an effective date.
Can I, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So moved.
Okay.
Is there a second? Yes. Been moved and seconded to accept item E1. Is there any discussion?
Yes, sir, I'd like to make a brief announcement real quick. So a couple of meetings ago, or maybe last month, it's all a blur, but at some point, I discussed a reorganization for the city, some of which had budget implications, like the assistant city manager position that is directly tied to the budget, but others that we're doing just with our existing resources. One of those was creating a new department, building and equipment services. This took the component of building maintenance from IT and the fleet component of environmental services to create a new department. As part of that reorg, we promoted our fleet manager, Roger Welder, to that position. And so that's why his name is on there, in case you were wondering who that is. And so he is the city's first building and equipment services director. And so I wanted to make that announcement to all of you publicly because he is here tonight. If you haven't had a chance to meet him, very energetic, very futuristic mindset. He's really going to fall nicely in line with my efforts to bring a more performance-based approach to everything that we do. He's done a great job of that with fleet, and so we're excited to see what he can do with the building maintenance side of the house. I don't know if you want to, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Roger Welder, Building and Equipment Services Department Director. It's good to stand here in front of you all and meet you, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Welcome aboard.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Are you going to present the item?
I'm going to start, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Are you having a hard time letting go?
I am a little bit. The only reason I'm going to start is because I was here when we started this process a while back. We came to you in June, and I'm going to kind of let Roger talk through the numbers, but we came to you in June when I did my budget presentation. And at that time, fleet was under environmental services. And so we started this process a year or so ago, started looking at this. Gilbert came and said, you know, let's look at doing this. And so we've kind of taken it. We've talked to other cities that have done this, and it's worked well. We believe it's going to be a savings. And I'll let Roger kind of go through that. But we talked about it during our budget program, and we had some questions. I think we answered those. We have, and so Roger and I are going to be up here. We'll be able to answer any questions, and then Gilbert will chip in. But I also want to say, Mr. Sosa with Enterprise Rental Car is here, so if we come across something and we need to ask him, he'll be here as well. So go ahead, Roger.
All right, so we did start looking at this program as an option as opposed to purchasing vehicles outright. It's really what the attractive feature of this program is for us monetarily is the initial cash flow savings that we have, that we eliminate the expenditure in the first year of using the product. It is only a pilot program, so we're looking at 12 light-duty vehicles to start this program with so that we can evaluate further the effectiveness of it. It comes with also a, excuse me, I'm a little nervous. It comes with a, on the back side as well, they have a comprehensive plan to salvage these vehicles once we use them. Our replacement cycle is much shorter than what we're able to do now. by about half. And it looks like that we will salvage more for the used vehicles on the backside of the program. So on top of that as well, these vehicles come with a maintenance program built into the cost of the vehicle. So there are several dealerships around Victoria that we will be able to take these vehicles to for service and maintenance, repairs. And this will alleviate some of the burden of our current fleet contract maintenance group, which, as some of my peers know, is they struggle with keeping up with some of the workflow. So it allows them to work on our more specialized vehicles that we use to repair streets and keep up with water, wastewater, things like that. So I guess I just need to say that we do recommend that we adopt this pilot program.
Yeah, I'll just briefly add too, that if you may recall from when it was presented during the budget workshop, one of the attractive measures that I'm not sure was clear enough in this presentation is that these are vehicles that were already slated to be replaced. And so rather than us spending the hundreds of thousands of dollars paying that one-time expense to buy them, we're simply taking this approach instead. So we're saving the need for that one-time expenditure, which is huge, while at the same time hopefully creating some operational efficiencies throughout the process.
Correct. If you look at the second page of the CM1, there's a breakdown. So if the city were to purchase these vehicles, we would be spending about $304,000 just simply by doing this program. The cost that we would save up front just in the purchase of the vehicles alone, because they get such a better rate than what we do, because they, of course, they buy way more vehicles than we purchase in a year. Their cost is $297,000. So you're almost $8,000 up front just in the vehicles in cash alone. And we're not paying that amount up front. So when you look at that, just using them to purchase the vehicles over us is a huge savings over what we would naturally pay for the vehicle. Now, in the long run, it comes out to be pretty close to even, but again, we're saving the cash up front and doing this on an annual basis rather than purchasing $308,000 worth of vehicles the first year. Page 3 is the vehicles listed that will be replaced. They are light vehicles, engineering, code enforcement, library, some trucks from the water department, UBO, and the safety department. And I'll be able to answer any other questions that you might have. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
I guess I have two questions. From a bigger picture, this is something we're proposing this year as a pilot program, but if it works, would we be looking at doing the same thing again next year with other vehicles and so that over time we might have the same expense, but we'd have more recent vehicles?
Exactly, and that's one of the key things here is that we tend to hold on to vehicles a lot longer than we should. This gives us a way to replace those vehicles on a more timely basis. It also cuts the repair costs that we have unless we actually damage the vehicle ourselves. The cost of the monthly maintenance of the vehicle is a lot lower. So if this program works the way that we've slated it, eventually most of the lightweight vehicles that we run in the city would come off of our current contract onto this contract, which would be a savings both on the vehicles. It would get the vehicles replaced on a more regular basis and would be cheaper on our maintenance contract.
My second question really was just something Mr. Welder said, something about that we anticipate, it had to do with salvage, and that you anticipated increasing salvage or something. Are you saying that you anticipate purchasing these vehicles at the end? I didn't quite understand what you meant.
Yes, ma'am, that's a good point. What we do now is, so if I'm going to salvage or sell a pickup truck that's 11 years old, I'm not going to get much money for it. If I salvage a vehicle that's 4.5 or 5 years old, the return on that investment is a lot higher than it is on a truck that's 11 years old.
But what's the difference? One of them you own, the other one you're leasing. So in one, you're selling it, in the other, you're actually buying it. I'm not following something. I'm not sure this is going to make it better, but.
Well, Scott, your point is accurate, is that the difference here is that on the lease side, we're going to take, with the help of enterprise, they'll be taking more aggressive. They'll be looking at the market. They have, at a given time, we might be able to take that lease vehicle, flip it, get a higher cash value return. Enterprise would take their portion for what they have invested in that vehicle. Any leftover would come to the city. What Darrell's mentioned is that when we take a vehicle like a truck, like it was mentioned, we get maybe 700 or even 1,000. Here, our opportunity is much larger. If that worksheet in front of y'all is showing about, I think, $56,000 in salvage value net. Of course, portion of that will be subtracted out for enterprise, and the remaining will be the city's portion. So we have a bigger opportunity to increase our salvage value return in cash. That's what it's saying.
And those would be more recent more current,
That's correct.
newer vehicles that we.
And we would have two options. We can take the cash, or eventually we'll turn it into another lease vehicle and use that extra cash to offset that value and reduce the lease payments. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
That's the whole purpose of it.
I have a question for you, Mr. Rania. And it's just a semantics. On the last line item of this spreadsheet, it's listed as estimated cash flow reduction, but yet the number's negative.
It's semantic. I mean, we're going to say,
It's
we're going to pay
estimated
out
as-
less money out. If everything works, the whole key here is the salvage value, making sure we do an aggressive turnabout. And keep in mind, some of the repair and maintenance here are very conservative from the city side. I expect the number to be larger, so the savings should be larger. But yes, it's less cash outflow from the city's perspective.
Yep.
And the other point that wasn't mentioned earlier when we were talking about expanding our lease program, it's nothing to do with the enterprise, but on the fire department side, Chief and I are looking into the possibility of lease with the Pierce Company. They also have a program themselves on the pumpers, which is about over $500,000. You know, that can also help us from a cash flow perspective over time because of what we need to replace our vehicles. That's another positive ingredient we're going to bring in next fiscal year, but we're looking at that besides this one. And slowly, hopefully, all this will be built up where we keep a cycle with the lease program where our cash flow will be minimized, and hopefully we have a good return on our investment. Does that make sense? Thank you.
When we buy vehicles in the past, do we buy them with available cash, or do we finance them?
We always pay cash.
Okay. So
We
then-
pay as we go.
So, good. So then you will actually be able to do an exact comparison with the lease costs and everything
That's correct.
after the pilot program is done. Okay,
As well as the maintenance.
good. Thank you. Any other comments on item E1?
One more, I'm sorry. Pilot program, how long is the pilot program? I'm thinking a year, but is it the full 5-year?
Yeah, we will run this for multiple years. I mean, you know, we'll be able to come back to you after a year and even several months, even 6 months down the road, and tell you what we're seeing. But in order to get into this and see the full effect, the resale value of the car at the end of the terms and things like that, it needs to run the full term. But when we come back to you with the budget next year, or when Roger comes back to you with budget next year, he should be able to show you where we're at with this program and if it's working or not. We should know fairly quickly.
One thing needs to point out, there's a clause in the contract, we can get out any time. So it's not, it might be a 5-year, but you know, which I doubt is will happen, that third, fourth year, things might be different. There's a clause in the contract allows us to get out. Well, we have to set up with enterprise, of course, and that's it, we walk away. So it's not, we're aiming for the whole 5 years, if I'm making myself clear. But we want to, hopefully, the program will develop well.
But we'll know a lot sooner than that how this is.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
Item E2 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute an interlocal agreement with the Golden Crescent Regional Planning Commission for E911 services and declaring an effective date.
I so move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on item E2? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Item E3 is a resolution supporting Victoria County's adoption of the optional fee for child safety and declaring an effective date.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to accept item E3. Any discussion?
Yes. Could somebody explain this to me, please?
If I may, since I'm listed here, I was approached by the county judge last week. This is a fee that the county can apply to vehicle registration renewals that is applicable to child safety purposes, for lack of anything other. It can be used to fund programs like CASA, HOPE. So that takes, it can only be used for child safety issues. The county is proposing to adopt this at $1 per transaction. They could have adopted as high as $1.50. About 60 counties have done this. And the way it works, the county will collect the money. They get a 10% fee for disbursement, and they must distribute these monies proportionally to municipalities and then counties based upon population. So if you, there's about 90,000 vehicles right now, so the judge did some real quick calculations, and we may be getting funds in the neighborhood of $45,000 to $50,000 that we can then use to distribute to these, to child safety issues. I would suggest that if we do approve this and we go on, that we would still stay in contact with the county and to make sure that when we have a year or more, that we won't get any of the money for approximately a year, so we have time to determine where the money should be spent. And I would think we would do it in concert with discussion with the county to make sure that there's no duplication of effort. But I think it's a very good way to fund these issues. I can tell you, in particular, HOPE. I have been contacted by several people about funding for HOPE, even sheriffs outside our county, that they realize that that's, and what HOPE does, they do a lot of the forensic interviews for children that have suffered sexual abuse. And they're one of the few agencies that can really provide that function, and they're key in this effort to protect our children. So that's what it's all about. And the county adopted their resolution yesterday contingent upon us ratifying that or in support of it, recognizing that we are the entity that will be receiving the bulk of the money.
And if I may add, more than likely what that would lead for us to do as staff is to put together a program that would recommend program guidelines, a process for entities to apply for the funds, and we would probably develop a similar process that we take with whether the CDBG process or the process to use hot funds. You know, we would establish an internal process so that these entities that would qualify could submit for use of these funds. So we would obviously take that year or so to develop that program, bring the program guidelines to you for support, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of how, what we would have to do on the back end. Of course, financially, this money would have to go into a very specific fund, which can easily be done by finance. So that's what we would have to do on our end before we start distributing money.
So the way I read the, especially the highlighted G section on the code, talking about a municipality of less than $850,000, this money could go towards a sidewalk. Doesn't necessarily have to go to the agencies that you've described, but we could set it aside to work on sidewalks around our schools.
That's certainly one of my first questions, yes.
I don't see where anything in here that says it has to go to an agency, but it's something that we could discuss at the time if we choose to
Sure.
do it.
And we could do, with the proper lead time, we could try and do research to see what this money has gone towards. This specific language talks about child abuse, talks about
sorry.
school crossing programs. I can tell you that in Kingsville, we did have a child safety fee that was actually attached to municipal court, which we currently don't have that. So that would be an additional avenue we could pursue if the council wanted us to try and get even more money to go towards this effort. But cities also have the ability to attach a child safety fee to go to certain offenses that come through our municipal court. We had that in Kingsville, and the way that we would utilize those funds in Kingsville were to support the school district with the school crossing guard program, or, something as simple as safety vest or wands, or, basic sort of expenditures that all had to do with child safety. So you're right that they don't have to go to a specific entity. They could go to buy products for a specific cause. But we could cross that bridge when we get to it.
Well, I was going to say, because my second thought was that if it did have to go to an agency, I kind of envisioned, and I know that it was brought to us by a particular organization, but I'm not at all persuaded that that means that's where the money would go. And I would expect that we would get applications similar to some of our other
Right.
programs.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm thinking about Leary Lane, and I don't know that we could fund all of it from this in a quick
Right.
amount of time, but there might be some gaps around other schools that would be able to be funded by this
Sure.
for children's safety.
And there are other things we could look at, like that Safe Routes to School program that TxDOT has for grants, for sidewalks, that, from my understanding, we've never applied for. So there are programs out there that we could pursue to try and get funding for that sidewalk.
And I understand there are compelling reasons for the organization that brought it to us, too, and I certainly appreciate them bringing it to us, so.
Well, the
we'll have to have
organization that
discussion.
brought it to us was Victoria County.
Okay.
It
Well, there-
wasn't brought to us
What about
by a
South
particular
Texas?
organization.
There's
I
another-
just listed things that I know they can be used for,
Sure.
and the statutes list many more.
Yeah. And if you reference that letter, that reference was really, I think, addressed to the county more than anything.
Right.
We simply attach it just for context so that at least there was a sense of, this is where this comes from, right? I wanted council to not feel like this was completely out of the blue, even though, yes, it came very quickly, but I wanted to provide that letter just as context that, this initiated, I guess, last month with the county, or whenever the date on that letter is. But anyway, that was the intent of the inclusion.
Thank you.
I have a question. If the county approved it, would they approve it only for Hope of South Texas? And what about if we change it, or does it matter?
No, it would be 100% up to us on how we choose to manage and disperse the money that comes to us.
Okay.
They just have the administration portion of it, and then of 10% of that fee. So every 10 cents they get to keep to administer the program or the collection and everything through the registrations of vehicles. But then the 90% gets dispersed to municipalities within the county.
And the county.
And the county.
And the county. So anything remaining, the county can spend the way they wish. They simply, the way it was presented to me is, since we would be the recipient of the bulk of the money, that they.
90% of it.
Yeah,
No.
No.
So
That's what it says in here.
the 90% would be
It's what's
split.
distributed proportionally by population.
So the county is required to send at least 90% of the fee revenue to the municipalities in the county according to their populations.
Right. The municipalities.
According to population.
Right, according to population.
So if our population of X% of the counties,
Is Bloomington a municipality?
no, we're the only one.
So we would get 90% at a minimum of the fees that they collect.
I see how you're interpreting it.
That's
Yeah.
what it says
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
That's the way I wrote, that summary that you're reading from, I wrote.
Yeah.
And that is the way I wrote it, yes.
Well, then maybe it's just me that misunderstood it.
I don't
So I
think that's the way
apologize for
that
that.
the resolution that they sent me read.
I'm looking at what we're voting on right now,
Sure.
and that
The-
they can give us,
The statutory language is on the next page in yellow, in paragraph E. And what it says is, a county imposing a fee under this section may deduct for administrative costs an amount of not more than 10% of the revenue it receives from the fee. So that's the 10%. The county may also deduct from the fee revenue in an amount proportional to the percentage of the county residents that live in the unincorporated areas of the county. After making those deductions, then the county shall send the remainder of the fee revenue to the municipalities in the county according to their populations. So the
Okay,
county
so-
population counts in that as well and could reduce that down below 90%.
Okay.
Yeah, and that matches the resolution that I.
That's correct.
Forwarded to you. Okay. Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign?
Mr. Mayor, this is not discussion on that item, but it was brought up during discussion. In the future, I'd like to hear more about the other fee that you were mentioning and attached to the municipal court.
Sure, we'll certainly work on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we've completed all the items on our agenda.
We do have a city manager
City
report.
Okay, city manager report, okay.
All right, Daryl, take it away. Oh, sorry.
Take it away, Daryl.
Okay, good evening again. So a couple of years ago, I came to council and we discussed with the council then that the waste management contract that we've had since 1991 would be coming up in 2021. We did a 10-year extension back in 2012. Some of you may remember that's when we got the HHW pickup and the curbside recycling pickup added to that contract, as well as the commercial and the roll-off. And so through some meetings with council, we budgeted to hire a consultant to help the city look at the feasibility of us providing the commercial containerized, and that's important to remember, pickup within the city limits of Victoria. And so last year, we hired NewGen Strategies out of Austin and Dave Yankee to do this study for us. Gilbert and I have worked with him hand in hand from day one to get this done. We think we've got a good set of numbers to present to you. Now, I'm going to introduce Dave here in a second, let him kind of take over, walk through a PowerPoint. Before the council meeting, though, I set a report on everyone's desk. It's similar, exactly the same, actually, of the one that's in your packet, just a little bit nicer bound report, but I'd encourage you to go through it. Dave's going to kind of explain things, but when he's done, there are a few things that I will get back up and talk about that we need to keep in mind as we talk forward, and at that point, I'll give you staff's recommendation. And so Dave will be able to answer questions, and I'll be able to answer questions too. But I think you need to hear what we've got to say before I get up and bring up other things that we need to keep in mind as we go forward through this process. So with that, Dave Yankee with NewGen Strategies. All right, thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Daryl. For the record, my name is Dave Yankee, President of the Environmental Practice for NewGen Strategies and Solutions. Let's see. So what I'd like to do, I've got a handout, and you were provided a copy of the report as well as a copy of the PowerPoint. But I'm going to go through, give a little real quick background. Some of you I have not presented to, so I do want you to know my background in this area. Then I'm going to talk specifically about the scope of services that Daryl described. I'm going to walk through the methodology of how we conducted our analysis, and then show you what our findings and recommendations are. And if you have any questions at any point, feel free to interrupt me. So just real quick background, why is our firm doing the study? What's our background? So we're a 44-person consulting firm. We specialize in conducting financial analyses for municipal utility clients, and we focus on solid waste, water, wastewater, and energy issues. I'm out of our Austin office. My background specifically, I've been working in the solid waste area for over 25 years. We focus on conducting a lot of these type of financial feasibility studies, operational reviews, cost of service studies. In fact, we did a study like this, very similar to this, for the city of Mesquite, Texas. Okay, so here's the scope of services. As Daryl mentioned, your containerized commercial solid waste collection and disposal contract with Waste Management expires October 31st, 2021. So we were hired to complete a 3-year pro forma forecast. So we're looking out at fiscal years 2019 through 2021 to determine the feasibility of whether the city should consider taking over the commercial solid waste front load collection service when the contract expires. So that's the purpose of the analysis to answer that question. So the methodology, what I'm going to walk through is looking at what the estimated revenues would be that are generated by the commercial front load service, estimated personnel costs if the city were to operate that, and this is a very important point. What I'm going to do is build up the costs for what it would be forecasted if the city were to provide these services. So hiring drivers, purchasing equipment, all the miscellaneous costs, fuel, maintenance, et cetera. And I'm going to walk through those and determine, is there a positive cash flow? Is this worth the city taking it over? So we're going to look at personnel, the capital costs, operating costs, and we're going to look at the impact on the general fund. And we'll talk about that when I get to that, because there are franchise fees that are paid by Waste Management to the city. So we want to make sure we're looking at a complete, accurate picture. And so then we'll also look at the impact on the city's reserves. So first of all, just to start off, we want to start off and look at what are the amount of revenues that are generated by the commercial front load service. And this is very important. I want you to be aware, Waste Management provides a couple different commercial services. The front load dumpsters, those are the ones that come with the truck, and it's got the arms that come out, pick up the dumpsters that a lot of your businesses have. You'll probably see them at restaurants and what have you. We are not looking at the commercial roll-off, which are those big dumpsters on the back of the trucks that a lot of time are at construction demolition sites or compactors at a Walmart, things like that. So just focusing on front load. So what we looked at were the revenues generated with your current number of customers that have service provided by Waste Management and the current rates. And so right now, the fees generated are approximately a little over $4 million per year. And then we forecasted out with a modest inflation rate, those increasing. We also included miscellaneous revenues. Those are related to if there's an overflow, there's an additional fee, or you can do lockouts or other additional miscellaneous things. So we included that.
David, do you want questions as we go, or
You know what?
at the end?
Feel free to interrupt and ask the questions as we go along. That way you won't potentially forget.
Okay, on the current commercial front load rates, it's my understanding in past discussions that this commercial rate that we have now with Waste Management provides a little bit of offset for the residential recycling program and is picked up by Waste Management in this rate. So seeing how these would kind of be decoupled, wouldn't that current commercial front load rate be reduced?
So what we're going to look at here, and I know it's a good question, what we're looking at are the revenues that are generated by the commercial customers. You are correct, there are some other services Waste Management provides, and we're going to talk about at the end with regard to the recycling center and the HHW collection program and those services that are provided.
But what I'm saying, with the rate structure that it is now, some of this commercial front load costs pick up the costs for the residential recycling program. So to keep the rates low on the residential recycling program, these dumpsters are picking up a part of the cost. So when you're looking at true revenues, the rates, if we did it ourselves, should actually be lower, and therefore your revenues shouldn't be as high as stated.
We are going to look at the recycling staging facility, and there's a potential cost because that is what Waste Management is operating, and that's what you're referring to on the residential recycling. So what I'm going to show in the analysis are the total revenues and costs, and the potential excess revenues if the city were to operate the service. And this has to be taken into consideration with some of the other services that waste management provides, specifically to your question, which is at the end of my presentation. If I can walk through the numbers, if I have not answered your question at the end of this, you can ask it again. I think I will address it.
Can I clarify something? Mr. Balknight, one thing, I guess, I get what you're saying, but remember, we don't know what that number is. So that's the waste management internal number. We could guess,
Yeah.
but that's not a guess I'd like to make because I'm talking about ratepayers' money.
Yeah.
So our best bet is to go with what the number is, and then, when we bid this out, we can then try and figure out at that point. But right now, I have a number to start with, and I just don't have enough to guess what, because it could be as little as 2%, it could be as much as 5%. There's just no telling.
Okay.
That's an internal company thing that we're not privy to through any request or anything like that.
And I believe it. If you can't figure it out, then I promise.
Thank you.
I'll go with this one right now.
Okay. So those are our revenues. So again, our starting point is a little over $4 million a year in revenues. And so all these costs are the projections. Again, if the city were to take over this service, what would they need? And again, I'm just going to provide the high-level numbers. If you look in the report and the schedules behind it, we have all the salaries that built it up, benefits, et cetera. So I'm just going to hit the high level here. So total estimated salaries, if the city were to operate it, starting out in year one, it's about $365,000 a year. That covers the cost, the salaries and benefits of 3 front-load drivers, a backup front-load driver, who's also container delivery driver, a supervisor, and 2 customer service representatives. And then those costs inflated 3% inflation just for purposes of the analysis. Those are the salary costs. A key item we want to look at are the capital costs. If you get into this business, you are going to need to purchase 4 front-load trucks, 3 that operate on the routes Monday through Friday, as well as on a more limited basis Saturday. You also need a backup truck. So if one of your trucks is down for repairs, you have a backup available, which is very standard in the industry. You're also going to have to purchase the front-load dumpsters, which are approximately about 1,500 of those, as well as several compactors. Bottom line, if you look at all the costs, and it's broken out in the footnotes, the vehicles in footnote 1, those trucks, would cost about $1,462,000. The containers are going to cost close to $1.2 million, as identified in footnote 2, and then compactors would be about $45,000. And then finally, you have to have a facility to store the equipment and the extra dumpsters, and you have to construct a collection pad that can handle those vehicles out where your residential vehicles are stored. Bottom line, it's about a $2.8 million investment. We've put in the amortized cost of these vehicles, the trucks at 7 years, containers at 15 years. And so you'll see in our analysis, we would borrow $2.8 million from the reserves and pay those back over a 7-year period, which is the life of the vehicles. And I'll show you this in the analysis. Your operating costs are going to be about $205,000 a year starting in 2019. Fuel is a big item. Keep in mind these trucks get about 3 to 4 miles per gallon, so they use a lot of fuel. Repair and maintenance costs, again, we spent time with Gil and Daryl looking at the current impact with your current fleet services contract, as well as some additional costs that would be incurred. Container delivery, if you look at that item, you'll see in 2019 it's $61,000. This is assuming that if you took it over and you're having to purchase these dumpsters, it's about 1,500 dumpsters. They have to all be delivered out to these businesses. So there's a one-time cost to put those out. And then you see that cost goes down. And the only cost going forward is if a business is growing and they need a larger dumpster, say an 8 versus a 6 or things like that. A big cost from an operating standpoint is the garbage. It needs to go to the landfill, the estimated tipping fees, and it's about 30,000 tons a year of commercial front-load garbage that's collected. So that goes to the landfill, and a tipping fee is paid on that. So we have the cost for that factored in as well. Another cost we factored in to be consistent, again, we want to make sure everything is compared. It's an apples to apples comparison. On your current residential collection operations, you have a transfer because there are support services from the general fund to the residential collection operation with personnel, HR, legal, those types of things. And so we've done the same thing and factored into our cost analysis a transfer from these operations as a cost of about $407,000 from the operation to the general fund. This is a positive or an additional amount of money that would then go to your general fund. This is probably the most, or from my perspective, one of the key slides I want to walk through with you. I'm not going to go through all the footnotes, but I do want to make sure you understand this one because it's important. Right now, you have Waste Management providing front-load and roll-off collection services. As noted in footnote 1, they pay a 15% franchise fee to the city on all those revenues. Well, to put it in perspective, that's about $955,000 to your general fund, okay? So if you take this service over, we have to look, what's the impact to the general fund, okay? Republic pays, there's a franchise fee on the commercial waste. There's a negotiated lower tipping fee, so you would lose a little bit of franchise fee revenue, about $34,000 a year. Key item, again, if you remember, we are not doing anything with roll-off collection, so you would still receive that franchise fee revenue, that $343,000. So the key point I want to mention is if you were to take it over, municipalize it, we have factored in that your general fund is going to see a reduction of this $645,000, and we have factored that into our cost analysis. So just like we have a salary cost, a capital cost, an operating cost, we have factored this cost in to see, can the rates and the revenue generated pay back this as well? And you'll see in our analysis, you can. So the key thing is your general fund will be made whole, will not lose any of this money through a municipalization.
I got a question. Is that common?
What?
Is it common for an enterprise operation for solid waste to pay itself a franchise fee?
They can. That's not uncommon at all. The point of this is we realize if you were to municipalize this, these are revenues that you will no longer receive from Waste Management. So we factor this in as a cost. So if it works well financially, and you'll see it does, this is part of the over-recovery that you will generate or excess revenues. Hesitant to use the word profit when you're a municipal government, although there's nothing wrong with it. It actually is part of your excess revenues or profit. So it would go back to the general fund.
Can you go back a slide?
Sure.
So this slide talks about a general fund transfer of a little over $400,000. Now, if you go up a slide,
Back or forward?
forward,
Oh,
forward.
yep. The
That
other forward.
400,000 is 10%.
Yep.
If you're saying that an additional plus $1,000 would go to general fund, you're talking about close to a 23 to 24% transfer that would go from this to the general fund. Am I understanding what you're saying correctly?
The $645,000 keeps you status quo, okay? You have that 645 grand coming into the general fund. We have factored this into the cost analysis. It is a cost that has to go in, so to see if you can still have an additional profit if you take over this operation. And it is separate from the $407,000 transfer to the general fund. That's additional on top of this.
Exactly. So the transfer to general fund would be
400.
over
about-
20,
Okay.
it would be over 20%,
Yeah.
with 10% being made up of, for management services, and this
Correct.
amount being for something else.
Right.
I'm bringing it up because I'm wondering how mechanically and how that would work. Because if we just see it as over 20% being transferred to general fund, then that's unheard of.
Yeah. So, Gil, did you want to say
No, I
something?
was going to make sure it's clear that number you're seeing up there, that revenue is going to be lost on the general fund side.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Right.
From our perspective, we're not considering that as it was never a franchise, it was never a inter-fund transfer. It was always franchise money come from the outside. That $400,000 is actually internal transfer of the 10%. Again,
I do. That franchise
So it's-
fee, that when it comes in, it stays in the environmental fund? Or it
that
goes into general fund?
$400,000 comes into
No,
general.
the franchise fee.
That one right there goes directly to general fund.
Okay.
Okay, it's not an internal service transfer.
I understand.
Okay.
But it would be.
Eventually will be to make general fund whole for that loss of revenue.
Exactly. Y'all, we all are saying the same thing.
Call it whatever you want to call it. Will be another additional transfer.
Right. Which would make ultimately the transfer to general fund over 20%, is my point.
Well, from my perspective, I think our policy says 10% of the proceeds, and that's what we're doing, the $400,000. The other one is just extra revenues being sent to make general fund whole. That's how I see it.
Sure.
So, and I will just say, when we get to the end, and there's a slide that shows this, at the end of the day, the city, if you were to enter this business, will generate additional excess revenue. It's a profitable venture. I'm kind of jumping to the end, but I do want to get through the analysis, but I apologize for some of the detail. I'll try to make it a little clearer here, but it's important to look at all these items. So bottom line, if you look at this slide in 2019, your total operating expenses are about $1.8 million, okay? That's your salaries, your tipping fees, your miscellaneous costs for fuel. Again, the general fund transfer, again, of $407,000, that's your 10% on the commercial, is what would be paid by this operation in the enterprise fund to the general fund. There's also the payback of the loan. Remember, you had $2.8 million that you borrowed from the reserves to purchase this equipment. You're paying it back over 7 years. Here comes that payment, that dreaded payment to the general fund, the $645,000. But again, we're saying, are you going to be made whole? Because you are losing that if Waste Management's not operating the business. Your total revenues are $4 million. The point is, after all of those costs, you're going to still generate an excess $779,000 a year, okay? And then on what we've done, kind of going to what you mentioned with your leasing example, we even added in depreciation on the equipment, and we're paying back into the reserve an additional $297,000, so that in 7 years, when you have to purchase new trucks to replace those trucks when they're old, you don't have to take a loan of $2.8 million from the reserves. you have already set up a new reserve so you can pay cash for that equipment, okay? You do that, you have a net $480,000 of excess revenue and over recovery. I'm inclined to just skip through the reserve tables and get to the final slide so you can see everything. But this is important to show also, you have these current reserves, a residential operating fund that has about $6.2 million in it. Again, remember I said you would have to purchase about $2.8 million in equipment. So we were splitting the withdrawal of it half from here and half from your closure, post-closure fund. So this is the $1.4 million, and you can see it's being paid back $200,000 a year during the first 3 years, and then it would be paid back and your reserve would be built back to where it was. Same on your closure, post-closure fund, it's at about 2.8 million. We would take the other half, the 1.4 million out, again, paying back for the equipment, 200,000 a year, so that reserve builds back up. And this is your commercial operating reserve, which you don't have a commercial operation right now. This is where your excess funds, your excess revenues would go, plus the reserve so you can pay cash for equipment, the $297,000 a year. So bottom line, and this sums it up hopefully somewhat clearly, if you look at the city, if you were to take over the operations at current rates under the scenario that's been built out here, the additional money the city would realize is close to $1.2 million a year. It's comprised of the additional general fund transfer, that $407,000, that's the 10% on your commercial operations that would go to the general fund. It's the reserve that's being set aside for capital, and then it's the over recovery, the $481,000. So it has a excess revenue of almost $1.2 million per year. Over 3 years, that would be close to $3.8 million. And this is the last slide I have then. From our perspective, we'd recommend that the city move forward with the procurement process to put the commercial services out to bid when the waste management contract expires, and then evaluate the impact of whether it makes sense for the city to take it over or, have another private operator if they provide attractive proposals. The key thing, and this goes to Councilman's question on recycling, something that does need to be kept in mind. We've shown that the cash flow is very good for the city to consider this. The thing you do have to consider is if the city does take over the commercial front load collection business, there are other services being provided by Waste Management with regard to commercial roll-off, and then the HHW curbside collection program, which is a very affordable program packaged with these other items, and they also operate the recycling staging facility. So if the city were to take this over, it's a very attractive business, but we do not know until you do a procurement process what the bids would be if someone were only bidding on, say, commercial roll-off, HHW, and operating the recycling staging facility. Because those are not, I don't like to use the term, but not as lucrative as the commercial front load. Commercial roll-off is lucrative too, but commercial front load. So you'd have to study the impact of bids received either as a whole package, which you would get them that way, and if they were just to do those three services. So I hope that answered your question, council member.
Yes, it shows me that there's room to come off of the commercial rates, but it might affect all this other stuff if it's all decoupled.
And so that's kind of where I come back in and we talk about this just a little bit. So, as Dave said, the HHW is something that we get, it can be used as many times a year as you want to use it. They take all of our hazardous waste. As you look at, when we bid this out, let me start by saying staff's recommendation is we still move forward with bidding this out. It is not that we move forward and just decide we're going to do this. Our recommendation is that we bid this out. Let's look at what we get. We want to bid this out in the best overall deal for the city, not strictly by price. There are a lot of things that are provided to the city by these contractors, Waste Management currently, or by other contractors, that if we went strictly by price, we may overlook and short ourselves on. So what we'd like to do is move forward with that process, work with Dave to develop an RFP. In that RFP, we would ask for an overall bid for commercial, household hazardous waste, curbside recycling, and roll-off. We would then ask for alternate bids for household hazardous waste separately, our curbside recycling program separately, and roll-off separately. And then what we would do is then step back, look at what we get, compare it to what we can do. Because it may be, this may look all well and fine, but if they come back with a $10 household hazardous waste rate per customer per month, or a $10 recycling rate, we've got a decision to make, because are we going to take our reserve that we build up to pay for that service, or do we go back with one single contractor who can do everything? And so it's going to be important that we do it in a way that we ask for bids for both, do the comparison, come back, look at the numbers we put together. I will say these numbers are built on the current rate we pay right now. But as Mr. Balknight brought up, there's no way for us to tell. I have no idea what their profit margin is, so I don't know what they can do and what they can't do. Could they lower their rate? That's up to them. Historically, when cities go out to bid after long terms like this, I like to remind council that we've been holding Waste Management to CPI only for 20 years. How many other businesses do you know that only did a CPI increase over the last 20 years? So I would not be surprised if the rates go up. I'll be a little bit surprised if they go down, because you got to remember a big part of your commercial rate is our tipping fees at our landfill. So as we work through this, the process is let us go out, do an RFP, see what we get, come back to council with a recommendation. And I'll answer any other questions.
I have a question. And
Yes, ma'am.
while it's humorous, I mean it sincerely. Do you understand the numbers that he just presented?
Fully.
Thank you. I lost him about 2/3 of the way through.
I'm gonna say thanks for doing this. I know we've talked about it a long time, and it's very interesting and very good to see the numbers. I'm curious to see how it stacks up against the bids when they come back in.
I can say I know Waste Management's here tonight, and there was going to be some others that said that I will put it this way. I know there are currently about 6 people interested in this process. I talked to them. One of them's local, and Republic is also interested. They're here local. TDS is interested. They're here local. They run our compost facility. Republic runs our landfill. And then I've had Waste Connections contact me. So we have people interested in this. Will that drive a better bid? I hope so. But, we need to go through the process, and this RFP will be written, and I know the mayor, it's very important to him. It's the best overall deal for the city. Waste Management donates a lot of stuff to the city, and the expectation for the next person, whoever it is not going to change.
But through your bidding process, you're going to try to quantify the unknowns.
Yes, sir. We will ask them to include any and all donations in there that they are willing to do.
Which will allow you to better assess your risk if you go it alone.
Yes, sir.
Correct. Okay.
And that pricing that we get separately on household hazardous waste and the curbside recycling program, those are big drivers for this. Because if we can choose not to do those two things, which causes a problem, especially the household hazardous waste, because now we've got it going into our landfill. Curbside recycling, you're going to make some people happy, you're going to make some people mad, and that's going to be a decision that council's going to make. I am not going to make that one, and I'm glad I don't have to. But
Nice
they
to
are
know
going to
we're
make a
needed.
difference. That's going to dig into that reserve if we have to make those decisions. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Our next step will be I'll come back probably within a month or so with a budget amendment to do a RFP, to work with Dave to develop that RFP, and we would like to probably have that out by the spring of next year. And our goal here is to get ahead of this, not behind it. If we do end up with a new contractor, I want time to swap out dumpsters in this city without there being any interruption to any of our customers, and that may take a while with 1,600 dumpsters on the ground.
I'd like to make a correction in my, in the 2020 budget, the environmental service did not include any costs associated to moving forward with the program for valuation bid. And I think what Darrell meant to say is that he's going to propose a change to the budget to the city manager to include that amount for the coming year for that bid evaluation process and everything else. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do we feel like we've got, and I know Councilman Balknight kind of asked it, but do we feel like we've got some kind of handle on what some of these new bids would come in at? I feel like we're maybe cutting ourselves short by only focusing on bids for commercial roll-off and hazardous waste and recycling. I'm afraid that, and I guess maybe we have enough time to be able to reverse ourselves if necessary.
Well, one of the options in there is for have somebody do it all, just
Well,
like they are doing now.
I didn't hear that in
Yeah,
what he was
so
Yes,
talking
ma'am,
about.
that would,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Jesus.
go ahead.
The first option is part of the RFP will be to bid to do everything.
Okay, I think I
Then
heard it.
separately, turn in alternate bids for those three items.
Okay,
So we would get a bid from hopefully all companies interested. We would get a bid for the total package, and then we'd get a bid for just those three items,
Or 4.
or four. Well, it would just be three. Because the commercial, at that point, you have that as a whole, and we know what our commercial number is.
But it's not, our number is not a whole number. I'm saying you'd still need on your RFP overall, and then you would need commercial dumpster, roll-off, HHW, and recycling.
And that would come as their whole.
No, you would have them split it out separately as if they didn't get each.
In other words.
But we wouldn't, I'm not
Okay,
sure,
I understand what you're
I'm not
saying.
sure we're considering as an option, having somebody do the front load pickup and us do the other three.
How do you know that it wouldn't be better?
I guess you're not,
getting
Well,
an
we're not going into it
yeah.
thinking
Yeah,
that's an option
I don't
for us.
have the availability to do the other three. The only thing that we've done the study on is going to be the commercial.
One other way to bid it, we do sometimes is bid each one individual and then offer what will you give as a discount if you're given the whole package. That's the way we do it a lot of times in bidding.
And that could be
items.
done
And you see
generally.
what I'm saying, and then you'll see if there's a discount or there's an incentive to have the whole package.
And you will see that just in the difference in the rates on the HHW between the whole package and not. I don't, Dave, you can say, but I mean, historically, it's one or nothing.
Yeah, and depending, this is, and it's something that Gil and Darrell and I have talked about, this is critical on how you want to set it up. And again, if we're helping you going forward with this, if you want, it may be worth a presentation to look at the different options to make sure everybody's happy with how it's packaged and lay that out.
We could list the four options, but it's critical that we still get a whole.
Yes.
But I think it's safe, I'm going to interject something that before we do any move, I think There's going to be a lot of conversation with the city manager on how we proceed forward with it. And at that time, he will probably make a recommendation, bring it before council, have further discussion before we have a final bid product. That's safe to say.
We are ahead of this by about a year and a half, but we want to be. It's a big thing. And we want to make sure we make the right decision for our citizens. We want to make the right decision for the city. Thank you.
That's all, the city manager report we have for today.
Then, if there's no further business before us, I'll adjourn.
I already